Hi, this is Patricia Grabarek. And this is Katina Sawyer, and welcome to the Worker Being Podcast. Today, we are so excited to introduce to you Eden King. Dr. King is an associate professor of IO psychology at Rice University, and she is also going to talk to us about some really exciting initiatives that she's putting in place at SIOP, which is the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology that we talk about so frequently on the podcast. So Eden, thank you so much for joining us. We're really, really glad to have you.
Thanks for the invitation. I'm excited to talk with y'all.
Absolutely. So could you just start by describing a little bit your involvement with SIOP, and then talk a little bit about the importance you think that professional associations play in the careers of researchers and practitioners?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. So my involvement with SIOP started when I was a graduate student. And after attending a couple of SIOPs and being very inspired and excited about the research and the profession more generally, I had the opportunity to serve as a student member, a student representative on a committee. And at that time, it was the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender People Committee. It was an ad hoc committee. And I got to help with some of the initiatives that committee was working on. As the years progressed, I got to do more and more things as part of SIOP. So I got to be on the Education and Training Committee and on the Science Committee. And eventually I was program chair for the annual conference and conference chair. And then I served as the conferences and programs portfolio officer. And then most recently I was very surprised to learn that I was elected to be the president of SIOP. So I have been very involved in SIOP my entire career. And I think being involved in SIOP has been one of the best parts of my career because it has given me the opportunity to meet and engage with people who are excited about the work we're doing and who want to do even better than we're doing all the time. And because it has given me a chance to see broader meaning and impact in the work that we are doing sort of as a profession more broadly than the individual work that we each do every day. So I think between the awesome people that I've met and the meaning that I get out of the work that we do together, it's been a really critical part of my career. And I would encourage everyone who has an interest in IO psychology to check out SIOP and to not just come to the conference, but consider deeper involvement and engagement.
Yeah, it sounds like that amount of involvement is amazing. I've definitely been involved to some extent. I know Katina's even more so, but sounds like it's been a big passion for you. And it sounds like you started with your involvement on the diversity and inclusion side, which is also an area of your research. So what led you to focus in on those areas, both at in SIOP and in your research, and why is that topic important to you?
I've been doing that research for a long time. I'm getting old, y'all. And then,
no, not at all. Sure about that. We're all getting old. How about that?
Yes. But I was asked to write about and reflect on why I started getting interested in that. And it wasn't until then, which was probably when I was going up, it was probably 10 years into my career that I really sat down and thought about how did I get interested in this topic to begin with? And it really took some reflection for me to realize that it all actually started with my dad. My dad has an invisible disability. He has half a leg and wears a prosthetic. I grew up as a kid and I would see his prosthesis in the hall or in the bathroom, and that was just part of who he was, right? And so he never seemed like anything other than an amazing dad to me. And an amazing person. And at some point I realized that not everybody would see him that way. And so he was one of those people who he would have occasionally use the handicapped accessible sign on his car. He can walk well, but not for long distances. And people would look at him funny as if he shouldn't be using that because you couldn't see that he was disabled. And so that's just one example of many sort of subtle forms of bias or discrimination that I saw him face, from an early age. And so I think that really made me realize that just because we're different from each other doesn't mean anybody's less than anybody else, and we shouldn't treat them as that. And so as I sort of, grew up and got engaged in learning and advocacy, it occurred to me that there's a lot of groups out there that don't necessarily get treated the way that they should. And so I I developed an interest, I guess, in social justice more generally, and in advocating for people who might not always have a voice. And when I paired that with my first experiences in research, well, that just sort of made all the sense in the world that I could do research on a socially meaningful topic and try to really make a difference by creating science and applying science towards helping people get that voice that they deserve.
Yeah, I think that's super awesome. And you're just like, basically like legendary status at this point now, both in PsyOp and in the diversity and inclusion space. And I think it's really important for everybody that does this kind of work. And, this is work that's near and dear to my heart as well. And to have some of that time to really reflect and think about why it's important to them and root yourself in, where do you want to see things go? Like there's so many different directions and ways to funnel that passion and that energy. And I, am so glad that you decided to funnel your passion, your energy into doing really high quality research that people like me can build upon. But you're also focusing a lot on diversity and inclusion through PsyOp and as the president of PsyOp. And I don't think anybody is surprised that you got elected. I know you said you were surprised. I'm not surprised. But deciding to focus on diversity and inclusion through PsyOp as a professional association, that's a big move to sort of position the organization to think about and reflect themselves on why this is important. Why did you decide to make that the focus for PsyOp, and kind of what do you hope changes as a result of having that kind of active reflection over the course of the time period during which you're president?
Yeah, it's actually funny. First, ditto on the "you're doing awesome research" comment. But also, I think when I did get elected, and I really was shocked, there was cursing involved with my reaction. I thought, why did I get elected? And then I kind of came to the conclusion that you did, which is, well, people probably voted for me because they thought I would do something in this space, right? Like if I'm known for anything, then it's for doing diversity and inclusion research and work. And so I figured that was why people might have voted for me. And so that gave me sort of the direction that I needed to try to carve out, an initiative or a program or a goal for the time that I have in office. And so some of the things that we're working on that I think are really promising. Well, the first one actually has happened, sort of halfway happened, which is the members of PsyOp voted to create a new executive board position, an elected officer for diversity and inclusion. And I think that's a really big deal. I feel very excited about that. If I don't do anything else, then I still will feel proud of that, because even though it wasn't my idea, but I tried to help push it through because I feel like it's a way for to ensure there's an enduring change and an ongoing voice for people who are from diverse backgrounds and for the topic of inclusion, because that means at every executive board meeting and every discussion, someone at the table will be thinking about diversity and inclusion. And I think that's so important, and I'm super excited about that. And we will be holding elections for that first position in the next month, and we're looking for folks to be nominated now. So as we speak, we are soliciting nominations for our first portfolio officer for diversity and inclusion, and I know we will get some amazing nominees, and I'm super excited to see what they do. So that's the first big thing. I'm also excited about two of the task forces that have been set off to try to investigate some work around sort of looking internally toward PsyOp. What are we doing? What can we be doing better? So one of those task forces is chaired by Lilia Cortina, and it's focusing on the sexual harassment policies of the organization and how we might be able to improve upon those. And I'm hopeful that that task force will come back with some recommendations that the board can implement and hopefully change things for the better for the years to come. And then I guess the second task force that I'm excited about is one that is chaired by Stephanie Johnson. And it's looking at, what do we know about people from different backgrounds at PsyOp? How are they experiencing the profession, the conference, the organization? And again, trying to understand, given the data that we already have, what can we be doing better? And looking there too for potential recommendations moving forward. So those are two of the initiatives that I'm really excited about at PsyOp, and that came from the notion that while I'm here, I might as well try to do some good. So that's what I'm aiming for.
That's awesome.
All of those sound amazing, and they all sound very relevant to other organizations. So, obviously professional association is really important because it reaches so many people. But we talk in our podcast to a variety of people, employees, employers, different leaders out there. And it sounds like everything that you're doing could easily be applied within other organizations. So I guess my question for you would be, how would a company or maybe an employee that's kind of seeing some issues within the organization be able to implement some of the things that you're talking about within their own organization? Do you have any recommendations for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the organizational perspective, the steps are slightly more straightforward. It's fairly clear that organizations should be doing some sort of needs analysis or audit where they try to understand where their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats might be related to diversity and inclusion, thinking toward diversity and inclusion as strategic goals and trying to align practices and policies throughout the organization with those goals in mind. That's a long-term approach, and I think it's one that organizations can and should undertake. The individual employee, that's a harder sort of perspective. There are certainly many things that people can do to advocate for themselves or others. I know, Katina, you and others have done some really awesome research on being allies. And I think that that's a really important set of individual actions that can be taken. Trying to create change as an individual would be difficult. And so beyond one's own individual actions. So probably forming some sort of coalition or group to engage in conversation at a higher level of the organization might be an important step to allow individuals to help facilitate organizational change.
Yeah, I like all of those tips. And I think it's always our goal, right, to continue engaging in research that can further answer those questions. And hopefully by way of being more aware of and having these things on our radar as researchers and practitioners, by your focus on D&I at the PSYOP level, will help people to think of even more interesting sort of ways that they might enact research and also practices in workplaces, so that people can get a more comprehensive view of the response to, what do I do when people have these kinds of questions. So I'm excited to see what it turns out. And with that, is there anything else that you would like our listeners to know about this upcoming year for PSYOP or your work, or anything else that you hope for kind of the future of D&I in general?
Sure. So I think what I would want to say is that when we look around at the news in the United States and elsewhere, there's a lot to be concerned about with regard to equity and inclusion. And I think it's important that we pay attention. And so our organizations are a reflection of the world we live in. And so we need to make sure that our organizations are the examples that we want to uphold, and including PSYOP, including our educational institutions, including the for-profit organizations in which we work. So I guess that's sort of the broader 30,000-foot view is the world that we live in is one where we need to be having these conversations everywhere. And so starting it at PSYOP is important to me. I would also put a plug in for this year's 2020 conference theme track, which will be on inclusion. And Katina, I know you're on that committee. Thank you for your doing that.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see. It's a whole day of programming at the conference related to inclusion. So I think there'll be some great conversations there that I hope will be reflected in the future as well.
Yeah, it'll be good. We're working hard on putting some good stuff together, and it'll be good. I'm excited about it too. I'm like, oh, I'm happy I get to go to all these sessions.
Yeah. I think they'll be fun.
Yeah.
So one final fun question before we let you go. What is a hobby or interest that you have that people might be surprised about?
I don't think I'm a jogger, a runner. It's hard for me to actually claim that. I enjoy running and jogging. I run races. I do not win races. Let's be clear. But I do like to run them, and I don't know that I would have guessed that about myself, 15 years ago. So there I am. I'm a runner.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, that goes
good,
along
healthy...
with our theme of wellness. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us, Eden. We're so lucky that you took the time out to talk with us, and I know our listeners are going to find what you have to say really valuable. So just thank you for being here, and thank you for all the work that you're doing in our field through PsyOp and through your research. We're a better field and profession because of you. So thank you so much.
Wow, you just made my day. Thank you.
And for all of our listeners, we'll include information about Eden below in the show notes so you can kind of see what research she's doing and follow along with her career. So thanks again for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for Eden for joining us today on our podcast. You can follow her on Twitter at EdenBKing1, and we'll also put her link to her website in the show notes. And if you need to reach out to us, we'd love to hear from you, love to hear your feedback. You can find us at workerbeing.com. You can email us at workerbeing@gmail.com, or you can contact us on social media at workerbeing. Thanks. The Worker Being podcast is hosted by us, Patricia Grabarek
and Katina Sawyer, and produced by Allie Johnson.